Hello and welcome to the Little Minds Big Ideas podcast with the Early Years Network. This week we are going to be discussing storybooks.
Storytime,
storytelling, storybook, language.
whatever.
All of it.
What's your favourite book?
As in to read with children or my personal favourite book?
Hello everyone, by the way.
Hello.
I sort of just keep the front door down.
What's your favourite storybook?
What is your favourite book?
In what tense though? Because the reading to children or...
No, your favourite book, like just your favourite book ever, like regardless of anything.
Okay, so I have a few.
Go on.
So these are books that I've read as an adult that I really struggle to put down. Okay,
Right.
so there's a few that come to mind. Blood Orange. I can't remember who wrote Blood Orange.
So that's a TV series as well, or is it just...
No, I think it's just a book. I read it in a day and I remember that I was going to get my car serviced and MOT and I just sat in the garage and read this book. And then my car was finished and I got home and I had to finish the last 3 chapters. I remember it so clearly. So that was a book that I just loved. I really enjoyed The Fault in Our Stars as well.
The what?
The Fault in Our Stars, which has been made into a movie. But the book is really good. I really enjoyed that book. And then there's one by Giovanna Fletcher called Billy and Me, which is just a beautiful story. So they're my 3.
What about early years books?
Early years books. I love The Gruffalo.
Everyone says the Gruffalo.
But I've got a nice little collectible version of The Gruffalo. It's really lovely. So that's I just really like that story. It's the first book you really learn. Like if you asked me to recite it now, I could.
I think most early years educators can sort of recite that book off by heart.
Yeah. I'm proud though. I like, which other books?
I like The Bear Hunt.
Yeah, I like The Bear Hunt, but
Again, it's like The Gruffalo.
it's that,
Yeah.
they all sort of sit in that. Basically, the Julia Donaldson's books are just engraved in my brain. They're so good.
For there to stay.
Oh my goodness, how can I forget Little Rabbit Foo-Foo? What's his name? It's gone.
What about...
What's his name? We met him.
Who?
He wrote The Bear Hunt and Little Rabbit Foo-Foo.
Oh, Lucy's favourite individual.
Oh my God, this is awful. What is his name?
I don't know, it's come from my head as well.
I'm going to have to Google it.
Doesn't matter, but...
Michael Rosen?
Rosen.
Yeah, Michael Rosen. Little Rabbit Foo-Foo is amazing.
What about The Sausage Roll?
Greg the Sausage Roll. I did enjoy that, yeah. I did. It's on my book review coming soon. No, Little Rabbit Foo-Foo, if you've not read it, is so good.
It's as good as I really need a poo.
Better.
It's something like
Little Rabbit Foo-Foo riding through the forest, scooping up the wriggly worms, bopping them on the head. Down came the good fairy and said...
What book do you remember most for getting you into reading? Do you remember? Was there a turning? Because I remember for me, as like in my early teens, it was Harry Potter.
I've never read the Harry Potter books.
But I feel like you sort of had to be like there and then in the moment with it. Or growing up, I guess, as a child now, like parents can introduce them. But if you're in like your 20s, like 30s, 40s, you're probably not going to pick the Harry Potter books up now.
I'd love to.
I feel like everybody knows what happens now because the films.
Okay, the book that got me in...
But I remember waiting for like Order of Phoenix. And when it got to that level of the trilogy, I remember going to Waterstones.
Trilogy?
However, I remember going to Waterstones like the day of release and getting it. Like, I remember that, and I've never had that level of excitement before or after for a book series.
Really know.
Like when Harry Potter was first coming out, it rivaled Game of Thrones when that was coming out as a TV series. It was like an excitement.
I wasn't a massive bookworm.
No, even was I. And that's what I mean. Like the Harry Potter books transcended reading and the
do you know what?
getting and the excitement of books for a whole generation of people. And for a lot of people, then hooked them on reading.
I read My Sister's Keeper on a holiday once with my mum and my sister. And I can't remember how old I was, but I was definitely in my teens. And I do think that book gave me a love of like those emotional stories and like really connecting with characters in stories. And that's what I look for. I really like books that I feel like I could be friends with the characters. That's how I enjoy it.
Do you not think that all plays on, we're going to talk about later when we get into imagination and things, but as a society, I feel like the more advanced technology becomes and the more advanced, more TV programs we have, the more easy access to things like that we have. And it's not just that, it's the diversity we have. If you're in science fiction and you're into sci-fi or if you're into rom-coms and stuff, there's so much out there now. You can find something.
I don't have to imagine it myself. Like that's like you said, we're going to talk about it, but we lose that. Like, I could watch a rom-com and read the book, and everyone always says, no matter what you're watching or reading, the book's always better. Everyone says that the books are better because the descriptions in it and the way that you can create those characters, and it's always true. Like The Girl on the Train as well. Again, I've read a lot of books that have been turned into movies because that's the type of thing I like to read.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I sit. And the books are always like The Girl on the Train is so good. And when we were on holiday last year, I read
that weird book,
Behind Closed Doors, and that I read in a day. And then your mum read it. Then your sister read it. And then I got home and I bought a hard copy and I gave it to my best friend and I was like, read this book.
This book got
So she read it. And it was one of those books, though, that it was so descriptive. I genuinely felt like I could see the characters.
Yeah.
Like I could see the descriptions in it of the house and everything that was going on. Like, it was bizarre.
But that's the power of your imagination, then.
Yeah.
That's unlocking the
A
imagination.
great imagination. But when I can really tap into my imagination and focus on a book, I can read them.
But it's a skill and an opportunity we don't give ourselves enough, probably.
No, it's definitely not.
And it's something. Do you lose it as a child? You just don't tap into it as much, or does it become embarrassing to use your imagination as you get older?
Like, it sounds silly. You focusing on too much of stuff. Like, your brain is filled up with, your mind is taken to other places. I haven't got time to create an imagination.
As a child, you relax by delving into your imagination, don't you? Like role playing, magical play.
Yeah, that's what their world's about, though, isn't it? So,
because I remember as a kid, like having my figurines and just recreating. Like, I watched Dragon Ball Z as a lot as a kid, and then I would get my characters and figurines, and I would then be in that world for like hours and hours. And like, we had like a room, like a playroom, but it was like a spare room. And my parents was walked in and looked at it like, what is going on here? But in my head, it was like really intricate, like this is there, this is there.
Yeah.
To them, it must just be like, the room's a flipping mess.
It's just a mess.
But like, you lose, I don't think you do lose that. I just think it becomes not acceptable to have that.
Well, there is that, yeah. But I also think, like, we don't have, if I said to you, Ben, tonight, we're going to get all the figures out, and we're going to play Imagination World and we're going to create these things. You go, but we've got to walk the dogs and we've got to make dinner and we've got to do this and we've got to do that and we've got to hoover. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've got an appointment tomorrow. I've got to get like, there's other things that take priority. So I don't think it's that you lose it, because if we wanted to, we could probably do it.
But I don't know, because I think kids are mean, and I think, because even I remember when we went deep into secondary school, there used to be those kids who played with like figurines, like Warhammer and stuff, in the library, and they're painting them and do all sorts. But they were victimised for it.
Yeah, kids are nasty.
They were mocked for it. And then when you actually flip it, you go, oh, actually, that's
jealousy thing, though.
I don't know. I don't know if I think it almost is shunned in society as adults having like that level. But then you go to another extent, though. But you go to another extent, though, and we watch all these films, and the people who create them must have incredible like imaginations. You know, the writer of Game of Thrones must have an incredibly vivid imagination.
That program we mentioned last week.
But a bit weird where he goes with his family members. If I was like his relatives, I'd be a bit questionable around incest.
Yeah, where have you got all that from? But it's like the program we watched last week. We talked about last week, sorry.
Yeah. The
3 Body Problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus
Wacky.
Christ. And that's a book series.
Yeah. Which I need to read, actually.
So.
Okay, let's go to early years.
Sorry. I'm trying to think of the books. We'll do some book recommendations as well.
Well, you're doing your series now, aren't you?
Doing my book reviews, yeah. We've got a few ready to go up. You're going to just drip feed them, aren't you?
Yeah. So you're basically just going to review early years books.
Early years books, new, old, everything in between. Ones you love, ones you don't like reading. Let me know. Send me your recommendations and we'll... Yeah. Anyone who's written a book and wants me to review it, I'm going to do Paul's as well. So... yeah, send us a book.
Right.
And we'll read them.
Early years.
That was early years, thank you. Right, so we've just talked about storybooks, why we love them, why we get into them, but why they're so important. That's the question for this week's topic.
Why?
This week's podcast. Why are storybooks so important to the development of young children?
And it all starts with language development.
It does. Stories introduce new language and a variety of language, a rich language to children so easily. You can read a story about loads of different things. Let's take the Gruffalo, for example. We've just talked about it. Some of the words in that It's new. You wouldn't usually say. So the Gruffalo at the end, when he's following the mouse, says extraordinary. When do you usually use the word extraordinary in day-to-day language? I'm trying to think of another word that they use, but I can't think of any.
But it's one of the things they say about the attainment gap. If you look at a lot of the details and the reports and things around the attainment gap and the difference between low income, high income families, one of the biggest discrepancies, aside from all the obvious things, is richness in vocabulary. And they showed a report, I can't remember when and where or what it was about in the end, but it was talking about how if you take low income families, the amount of words, like I'm just talking about numerical words that they're exposed to. So like, let's say across the first 3 years of their life, there might be, I don't know, 600 different words. And then higher income families, it might be 1,500 different words. That's completely off the top of my head. But it was quite interesting to show that. How they came about that analysis and how they got their data, I'm not sure. But it was interesting to show that. So as early years settings, as people, educators working in early years, it's as much as we can to try and address that gap and try and introduce them to not just new words, but the context around.
I was going to say, it's not just learning the words, it's sentence structure, it's alliteration, it's punctuation, not punctuation, pronunciation, it's all of those things, it's syllables, it's rhyming words, it's all these different things that come into language, and the pitch of your voice going up and down, and how you can make people have different voices and things like that type of language skill that comes into it.
I talked about it in my Ofsted class, but even just having an understanding and awareness of phonological development.
Yes.
It's not the case of having to sit children down in a sort of lesson type environment, but having an understanding of how syllables work, how patterns in language and in rhyme and how all these things work from a phonological standpoint, and then introducing it through play in games and games that we're going to come on to that you can use stories around and different ways you can engage children in sort of fun, exciting ways in storytelling.
Yeah.
I think let's start off with this podcast a bit talking about stories aren't just a filler. They're not just a time, space, moment in time filler for you to use at the end of things. Stories should be part of your, encompassed in part of your curriculum, part of your, how you develop children.
There was very much, I remember when I started out in the early years, there was the stigma of, oh, she just sits down and reads books.
I know, yeah.
Like, she just sits with the children and
reads
reads
books.
Option. Yeah. Whereas now, I was actually in numbers most of last week, and 9 times out of 10, you'll catch me reading a book. Doesn't matter what area of the room I'm in. Yep. I could be in the small world. If someone brings me a book, let's read it. Could be in the book calm area. Let's read it. In the garden, wherever it is. If a child brings a storybook to me, I'm going to read it, because it can branch off into so many different things. And then children will gravitate and want to listen. It doesn't matter where you are. And I think it's really important. One of my colleagues was reading Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And I was at the other side of the room with 2 children playing with dolls, and they both stopped and were focused on the book. So my attention shifted, and we commentated on the book quietly from our corner, even though we weren't necessarily at the area where the story was being read.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand that books should come into, like you say, every part of your provision, because you can make a beautiful tough tray, put a storybook with it that relates or loosely relates. It doesn't have to be directly related, but if you can encompass a story and introduce new language through it, because not all children will want to engage in the tough tray. Some will just want to read the story.
And books can be used for, different books have different skill sets in a weird way. Like, you can have really vivid imagination stories, which will really tap into their imagination. But you can also then have books that have a slightly more moral story.
Yeah.
Or books that will help with behavioural aspects to it and emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
You can also have books that are informative and educational in the sense of they're linked to STEM subjects and can engage their interest with that. And maybe you rely on those books more from a picture point of view, because maybe they are encyclopedias and textbooks that actually, in terms of words, are slightly more heavy for children. But even if you present a child with an encyclopedia about a topic like farming or whatever it might be, that they're not necessarily going to understand and engage with, in the typical sense, they'll still engage with it a different way. Cookbooks, another one, if you want to talk about nutrition. Perfect example is to get cookbooks or magazines out to introduce them about the world. And if you can get magazines when you go on holiday from different countries and bringing them in. And again, it's just about bringing culture. Just check the magazines, make sure there's no lewd images.
Yes.
But
Shirley's never told me to bring this in. No, don't say that.
But I think understanding that books and stories can have different roles and different purposes. It doesn't just have to be fill. And then there's also the way that we engage with stories and the engagement that we have and how we utilize them as a tool within early years.
Yeah.
And everybody will have their own style, but there's different things we can do with them. I think we're going to talk about that later on.
One of our members of staff is a fantastic storyteller, and she creates voices, and what she actually is very good, she'll purposely say the wrong line of a story. So she'll end the sentence wrong, and the children's, that's not what happens.
Yeah.
It's getting them to think, and are they listening, and are they so Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and she got to the table and there was scrambled egg on toast, and they're like, no, it's porridge. So they're thinking about what she's saying and correcting and working through the story. It's really lovely to see.
But there's loads of little strategic things you can do like that will engage them
even more so.
Yeah, and you'll drive more learning out of it.
And you'll be able to scaffold and ask questions. Oh, why is it not like what's going on?
What happens next?
And that's what we were talking about, those cognitive skills that come from storybooks. Because when you're asking questions alongside the story, you're making predictions, you can solve the problem for the characters, you're able to follow along what's going on, talk about the characters, what you can see, the relationships that come into it. And then that's where memory and reasoning comes into it as well, because they're memorizing what's happened and thinking about,
and the demonstrating
is that the right thing? Yeah. I always like to ask children, like, what do you think is going to happen? Or why do you think they did that? And things like that, because you're not just them reading the story.
Yeah.
You're bringing those extra skills into it, which is always really important.
And they're quite literally partaking into it. And then you can transform stories. Take it on your own course. Take it on your own pathway. Yeah. Doesn't have to stick with what's written down.
No. And then that leads on to your favourite, imagination and creativity. Let the children take the lead. Let them make their own stories using figures, small world characters, outdoors, listening to noises, like what can you hear? Who is it? Where is it? Make a story up. Helicopter stories are fantastic for doing this. And it's a great way to engage children into being imaginative and not relying on a physical book to create a story.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the world that they may create in their head one day might be on HBO and be the leading series.
Yeah.
But imagination isn't just, it may seem it in early years in terms of imagination and creativity being childish and fairyland, all that jazz. But then that skill of imagination and creativity will then boil over into another remit as they get older and older.
Yeah.
We spoke about this, I think, last week a little bit in terms of actually we want children to always be curious. And as they get older into adults, not lose that curiosity, not lose that imagination. And stories and getting them hooked and captivated around that is a brilliant way to do it.
It is. And when children can trust their imagination to build these stories, the more creative they're going to get.
Yeah.
Because if their story is not taken seriously, but if you immerse yourself in their imagination story that they've created, then they're going to do it more and more. And I think that's really important as well.
I do want to do a class this year on imagination and how it works in the brain.
Yeah.
Because I'm not even entirely sure myself yet. I haven't done the research into it. But it would be fascinating to see how, from a neurological standpoint, how it works.
Yeah, I agree.
What part of the brain, not necessarily what part of the brain it works, but how it works within the brain. It must be something to do with the neurotransmitters. It must be something to do with the chemicals it releases. But there must be something else, because some people have more of an ability for imagination, but I don't know if is that a natural thing or is that a product of your environment? i.e., have you been given the opportunity to use your imagination?
Yeah.
Have you been encouraged or discouraged? Because adults can sometimes accidentally get things wrong. Children could be playing imaginatively in times maybe when it's not acceptable. Like, I remember even as a kid, I'd walk around supermarkets like fighting imaginary bad guys. Like, I had a very vivid imagination as a kid. But at the same time, I remember I lived in a village where not a lot of kids my age lived in it. So I played on my own a lot outside of school. So I had to tap into my imagination more as a child. Whereas I guess if you're in an environment where you're surrounded with children, you play with children a lot,
siblings
you get that social element massively, but maybe you don't get as much of an imagination development as well. So it's interesting, isn't it, to see, is imagination biological, is it environmental, or like most things, is it probably a combination of both? Yeah.
So that's another fantastic reason as to why children should be exposed to stories and imagination.
And another fantastic reason to subscribe to the Earliest Network and come and check out my class one day about imagination.
Another one is the emotional understanding that you can get from stories.
Yep.
There's so many stories and so many characters and so many emotions. it doesn't have to be those books that are about emotions to tap into emotional understanding.
In the early years, emotional development and co-regulation, like books is probably one of the best tools because it's the easiest way to normalize talking about emotions. And it's also the easiest way to introduce literature and language around emotions and to provide them with that emotional language and understanding.
There's some fantastic books about specific emotions. I'm thinking of Ravi's Roar just comes straight into my head when he gets angry, turns into a tiger, and then nobody wants to play with
series
him.
of books. I don't know who the author is. I can't remember, but they're brilliant. You can probably do a review on one of those.
Yeah. We've got them. I'm going to go and get those ones. So
there's
they're
that
really
Worrysaurus as well,
which I read to the dog when she was going through a lot.
Which one was the one where it was on that Ravisaurus? It was that series of books, and it was about
Norman.
Was it Norman? It was about wearing a dress or something.
Norman and his wings.
That was it. His wings.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that was it.
He had wings that he loved, but he always wore his coat because he was embarrassed by his wings.
Yeah.
And one day he took his wings off, and his mum and dad still loved him. And he was brave. Oh, don't! It's so beautifully written. And we had a child who really connected with.
I think we had a child, have we?
No, we had a child in one sense that really connected with that.
Yeah, you did. You used to walk around with it.
He used to hold it, and I used to think, oh God! But it's giving your children an outlet, like, oh, okay, like someone else's got lovely wings.
Normalising, talking about your emotions and feelings and making.
What's he called?
And it's not just that though. It's also we're going to talk about it next.
Norman, I think it was called.
We're going to talk about it next in terms of having books in your settings that allow children to see themselves. Remember that book I got? We had that child in one of the settings who was a young black girl, and she got quite upset about her hair. Do you remember this?
Yes, yeah.
And in the end, we invested in some dolls and stuff, but also book talking about like how
I think it was called like, I Love My Hair.
Yeah, it was because our black hair is different to white girls' hair. And she was figuring that out because she was surrounded by. I think she was almost the only.
One or two, many of
it was a predominantly white class, was
like her, yeah.
And all the children had obviously then very fine hair, different to her hair, and that really upset her, I remember. And so having books and literature and stories can really help with dealing with children feeling included. We talk about inclusivity a lot, and often, again, I talked about this in my Ofsted class. When we talk about embracing culture and diversity and inclusivity, we focus on holidays and things like that. But it often, if you go to a foreign country, you don't miss St. George's Day. It's not that you miss the small, silly customs, as we would describe them, but actually are incredibly important.
It's like as well, the other experience we had where a member of our staff asked if we could get some more booked on same-sex families.
Yes.
Because her and her wife had a child.
Yeah.
And never have we ever, I don't care, like, doesn't matter to me, but it's never something that I'd thought, God, we've not got any stories that represent these families because the families themselves had never brought that to our attention.
No.
But this member of staff had, and that's really important. I think there was one about two mum pirates.
Yes.
And they do, like, do you know what I mean? That was one that stuck. I read that the other day. But it's little things like that. Like, that's normalising families and families looking different. And that is just as important.
Even things just like children from single parents, whether it be single mum or single dad, for whatever reason.
Yeah, so books about families that look different from the norm and your typical.
I remember we had one little girl who referred to herself as the sperm baby.
She did. She was, I'm a sperm baby. I don't have a dad. But mum had been totally honest with her. I've never come across a book.
No, called the sperm baby.
Called the sperm baby. So if you've got one, let us know.
But yeah, so I think when we talk about cultural awareness and diversity, this is a really, really clever, again, way of bringing.
And it's not just about having a book about a specific holiday
or Ramadan or whatever it
rolls out.
Yeah.
When it comes into play, it's about looking at your community and who are the cohort representing and what do your resources represent. So like you said, we had to invest in these resources to make sure that we weren't having everybody included. But just because you haven't got them and you need to invest in them doesn't mean you're wrong.
No.
It means that you're moving with your cohort. And I think that's really important because we should be introducing children to all types of people, like every colour, every language, every race, everything. But you can't do it it's not something you do intentionally or not do intentionally.
It doesn't have to be a very costly thing because you can create your own stories. You can do other things around it.
I was just going to say.
It's just about dealing with that topic, whether it be emotions, whether it be cultural awareness and diversity. It's dealing with that in a way that brings that child feel more included and opens. The thing is, when you talk about these books, sometimes it can go down a political sphere, but you've got to leave politics at the door, and it's making children actually understand and have that awareness that we accept everyone.
Exactly.
And it doesn't matter your colour, your creed, your sexual orientation. Like, that's too much and too heavy for children to understand at that level. All at this early years level, all they need to understand is that everyone's unique and everyone's special, and that's okay.
But that's where you do struggle sometimes, because parent views
But that's what I mean.
can creep into
we
it.
leave parent views and politics at the door.
We do, but sometimes when children bring those in because they've learned the language, that's where you have to use your skills to educate that we are all unique and we are all special.
Rare though. Rare that a child will bring in. They may know the language, but contextually they don't quite have that understanding of what they're saying.
No.
But that's a very rare.
I do have a funny story on that, but I won't say it because it was a lot.
You can't leave everyone hanging.
With the light switch?
No, you can't.
No. So...
Okay, cultural awareness and diversity, ticked.
That was so...
Social skills and relationships.
Sorry, I've got the giggles now. Social stories and relationships. I think...
These books are very communal anyway.
Yeah, and it's representing what you see in books, like we've just said. It's like you see characters blossom relationships. You see the mouse and the Gruffalo be really brave. You see all those different things. You learn in the morals. You're learning how to interact, how characters interact, so you can take that out. So they're very social anyway.
But like we keep saying, there is ways that you can structure news stories that are incredibly social in terms of like teamwork and creating stories. You can create your own story. Someone goes like one sentence at a time. You keep adding as you go around to the story. You can ask one child to tell a story, and it can be the smallest thing in the world, but then you transform that into like a play and everyone acts it out. There's loads of ways in a social environment that you can create
easily
imagination and stories, and then that richness of vocabulary and words over the top of it.
And then you learn those social norms through stories as well, and things like that. So that's a good one. This next point is my favourite, I think, bonding and quality time.
Yeah.
And I think this is a nice one for parents as well, is that reading stories together, if a child wants to lean on you, or just that connection that you get when you read a story with a child and they're so involved, it's amazing. And I used to babysit when I was younger, and I would read a story before the child go to bed, and you could tell that children did that every single night.
Yeah.
And they needed that, and it was their calm time. And even though I wasn't mum, they would still like snuggle in, and that quality
quite
time
an
of
intimate
just
moment,
reading a book. Yeah. So I think
how many
that's a
parents do you
lovely...
think have read to their child the Harry Potter series way too early? It's just got over the top of their head. Or how many do you think it will soon be Game of Thrones? Oh, he's 3, and we'll just skip this part out.
Khaleesi goes to nursery. I want to be Khaleesi, and you can be Drago. You be Drago. Like, oh no.
It's when the ending part with the Lannisters in, and the Lannisters were upstairs playing.
The Lannisters were playing. The Red Wedding, they all wore red dresses. That's about just tweaking it, But that bonding and quality time is really important. I think it's not something to take for granted either.
No, and I think again from an earliest perspective, it really helps build those positive relationships and embed that child, especially in the baby room. Books can be carried through into the baby room as well. And really importantly, because it'll boost your communication. And people should be talking in baby rooms all the time. So it helps practitioners, educators to focus sometimes that word. If they're newer members of staff, maybe less confident, it gives them something, a crux, if you like, to utilise, and then they'll develop themselves over time. Yeah,
exactly that. And then it is essentially preparation for literacy, isn't it? Is
future education
and academic skills that come with it. It is the basis of it. And like you say, we're trying to make that gap smaller, with what children are exposed to and allowed to do and have. And
I think it's because scientifically we know children learn language and the ability to communicate through social communication.
Well, you'd never learn language if you didn't hear it. So,
and that's the thing. We know that now. Scientifically, it's been evidence and proven that's how we learn. So if we want children to learn language and be able to communicate effectively, then we need to have rich language around them at all times. And the easiest way to promote that as like an industry, as a community as a whole, is to promote the importance of books.
Yeah.
You technically can teach children really effectively and really well language and never use storybooks, technically.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But
It's another tool.
it's a really, I was going to say, it's a really, 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 really good tool. So why ignore it? But also it can be a really, really bad tool if you don't use it effectively, like anything.
Yeah. And don't shun the member of staff that is reading stories with the children.
No, unless they're rubbish. Unless they're rubbish at reading stories. Unless they're really boring voice, and son walked down the street.
The child might be engaged.
No, I bet they're not, though, are they?
I was with a group of 2-year-olds actually, and I think I'd read six storybooks, okay? Just going back for what I said.
All right, Emily, it's not
And I was
competition.
like, no, I said, your turn to read me a story now.
Yeah.
And they were like, I said, no, I've read loads of books. I said, it's your turn. I got the book. And they kind of were like, And obviously they were like, I don't know. So I just asked the question, so what's on this page? What can you see?
Yeah.
It wasn't the story I'd just read, that's for sure. But they'd pointed out different things that they'd noticed on the book that I hadn't read because it wasn't the story. So I was like, no, do you know what? Your turn. I'm tapping out. I've read loads, your turn. But that's a nice way to get children involved and take that lead. And just because it's not the story, it's still going to encompass what they believe the story is as well.
Yeah, that's a brilliant way of doing it as well. And especially if you could,
Thank you.
but especially if you can get included as well children maybe who sometimes are slightly quieter and that is so
It's
many
a
different
perfect
ways.
opportunities, one-on-one reading or small group readings when there's not many children around. But small plug incoming. The Early Years Network platform does have a class all about storytelling.
We do, from Olivia.
And Olivia tells it lovely, and she gives loads of tips and tricks and encompasses ways that you can.
Her inner actress really comes out.
It does, yeah. I mean, Olivia's got acting training. She is a storyteller and a half.
Even though I think in it she has an impression of someone who reads stories really boring.
it's
That always
so
makes
funny.
me chuckle.
She's so good. She goes, but no one wants to read a story if it's like this. Because the first time you edited it, you were like, "Go watch this." So yeah, have a look at that. Sign up to the website. £4.99 a month. You can get Olivia's class and many
When
more.
this goes out, my Ofsted class will be out.
It will, as long as technology's on our side.
Oh, God, can you imagine?
I filmed my positive mental health class today,
Which will be coming out when this comes out within the next 7 to 10 days. And that'll be really good to
we're
get out.
rolling out another couple. So yeah, we're keeping going. It's definitely the platform that you need to be on for your early years learning and development. Don't let your staff knowledge be the reason that you don't feel that you can be empowered at work.
Yeah, don't be a smelly and miss out.
Yeah, don't be smelly. Don't be a silly goose and miss out on the early years network. So yeah, I think that's it from us today.
I think we've covered stories quite convincingly.
Can't convince
Do you know what?
I'm convinced the story. I'm so sorry. I was so rude earlier.
Why?
What was your favourite book?
Well, growing up. Well, it was Harry Potter. I got that in somewhere.
But like, you've never really read books to children, actually, in a setting, have you?
No, I can't.
Not a big group, anyway, that would encapture.
To be fair, we used to, when I did Forest School a couple of years ago, we did
I was going to say, what would you get?
we did
from
those
that?
emotion books. Because that was the time I bought all those Rowdy Raw and all that series of books. It's annoying me, I can't remember who's the author of it is. But actually, let me stall and I can sort of Google it as you're talking about your second favourite book.
Okay, so shall I just reenact Little Rabbit Foo-Foo?
Got there.
Down, we got to the bit where we stopped. Down came the good fairy and said, "Little Rabbit Foo-Foo, I do not like your attitude. Scoop it up the wiggly worm."
Tom Percival. There we go. I've saved you all, you guys. So you got Milo's Monster, Perfectly Norman, Ruby's Worries, Ravi's Raw, Tilda Tries Again, and Misha Makes Friends. I'll go on Misha. You can currently get them all on Axel Books for $29.99. That seems like
very
a good
good.
deal.
Get another pack or two.
So yeah, they were fantastic for it. And then also got Molly Potter's emotional books that
Molly
we often
Potter's
use.
emotional
And
books are
Molly
very
Potter
good.
is on the Early Years Network.
She's
Got a course talking about emotional intelligence, and she does some fantastic books.
does.
They're right next to us, actually, weren't they, at the expo?
They
a few
were.
months ago.
And then you've got the Colour Monster books.
Yeah.
Fantastic books.
They're a great way of, again, talking about emotions and that element of it.
Yeah.
I think everyone knows the Colour Monster at this point.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
So yeah, that is.
Maybe
that
we
is
should write a book one day. Like for
We've got a
children.
lot going on at the moment, so maybe in a couple of years.
We could call it
It would have to be. What would it be about?
Nala the Noodle.
What about a Doberman?
Yeah, about a Doberman. Everyone thinks she's big and scary, but actually she's
really scared.
and a bit of a wuss.
Okay, no one can take that idea. That's our idea.
I think anybody who has a Doberman's probably had that idea.
Not to write children's book. Copyright. Not a noodle.
And we can help and then we could do one about XL bullies.
And they're gentle giants as well.
Yeah.
We could do one about our other Doberman, Darcy the Dick.
Darcy the Dick. Just destroys everything in the house. Right, okay, we're just venting
And then
about
has a
dog
cuddle
stuff.
and thinks it's all okay.
Which is bloody gorgeous.
It's too cute. Anyway, right, that's us.
Enjoy your week, guys.
Enjoy. Have a fabulous week, Monday, the rest of your week, and we will catch you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.